So guys, for this month's thought for the month, I thought I would bring you outside into my back garden because all my videos have been recorded sitting on my chair in my room. So I thought a mix up of scenery would be nice. So this month's thought for the month, I just needed to grab my book, is going to be about doing some heart work. So I thought during this time of quarantine is a good time for us to have a look at our hearts and what's going on in our hearts and how we can examine our hearts and how God wants us to examine our hearts. We've been granted this blessing of extra time and I want us to think about how we can use it more wisely. Maybe you're wondering, well, what does that look like? And I'm going to share what I think that could look like for you today. So I think the first thing that you have to do is to ask God to examine your heart, because He's the one who's going to identify those things to you that you need to work on, that you need to work through, so that you can get through them, so that you can deal with them appropriately. In Psalm 139 verses 23 to 24, it says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart, try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." You could even pray that specific psalm. So David was asking God to search him and to point out the things in his heart that weren't right, so that he could fix them and he could become closer to God by fixing them. So I want to encourage you to pray that psalm, pray it out and ask God to examine your heart and make things clear to you that you need to work on, that you need to, I feel like the words aren't work on, but that you need to like the only words I can think of is work on, but the things that you need to come head to head with to become the person who He created you to be. The next thing, or the next step I would suggest, is be still and wait. That might look different for everyone, but some ways that it works for me is by just lying there and thinking and reflecting on the things in my life, reflecting on events that have happened, reflecting on the things that God has done in the past. And usually God's voice becomes clear in that. He directs my thoughts to what He wants me to be thinking about. It sounds a bit mad, but it works for me. Another way that you can hear God's voice clearly is through His Word, by just reading His Word, and He will point things out to you. He'll make things clear to you in that. Go into the Word expecting to hear from God. So now the question is, why should I spend this time doing the heart work? Why should I bother doing this? I think the first thing is that you've got time to. There's so many other things in our life that happen on a week-to-week basis, and we're running so many different places that we don't have time. So when we have the time, we may as well use it. But the main reason why I suggest doing this is because you're going to experience freedom through it. You're going to break down those chains that the enemy is using against you. So why would you not want to do that? Ultimately, the heart work is going to remove and deal with those heavy things that are weighing you down. Maybe it's sin, maybe it's addiction, maybe it's, I don't know, there's so many things that weigh us down on a daily basis. Maybe it's that you feel so far from God. Maybe it's that you don't have a relationship with God and you're wondering how this world even works. Maybe you're just struggling, but meeting with God in that brings about freedom, and it brings about this experience and this connection that you can have with God personally, and He just comes in and invades your heart and frees you from those things. And I'm speaking from experience. There's so many things that God has freed me from that have been holding me captive for so long, and I want you guys to be able to experience that same sort of freedom. Ultimately, it's going to draw you closer and closer to God, and when you draw closer and closer to God, it's going to draw you closer and closer to His divine purpose for your life. And it's our desire to be closer and closer and more in line with His plan and His purpose for our lives, because that's what's best, because He knows what's best for you and for me. It's going to make you more and more like the person who God intended you to be. And if that's not the desire of your heart, it should be, because we want to be more like Christ. We want to be who God always intended us to be. Oftentimes the things that God has pointed out to me are things that I didn't even realise were going on in my heart at the time, things that I was struggling with that I didn't realise were necessarily big problems, but He pointed them out to me and was like, Phoebe, I want you to work on this, I want you to deal with this now, and I want to break those chains to free you. So I had been reading a book called Rhythms of Renewal by Rebecca Lyons, and she dedicates a whole chapter to doing the heart work. And a quote that she says that I really loved was, "Until you get quiet, you can't know what your heart needs to confess. You cannot heal what is hidden, but when you confess something out loud, you bring it into the light where it can be healed. Secrets lose power when they exit the dark." Like, that just spoke to me on a whole other level. Like, the things that are going on in your heart, when you speak them out, you just feel this weight lifted off your shoulders. Like, I know if I'm struggling with something and I go to my friend and I tell them that I'm struggling with it, I feel lighter already by just saying what the problem is, not even by dealing with it. And that's how it is with God. Like, we need to turn to him, we need to give him those things so that he can show us how we can work them through, and how we can work them through to the point where we're free afterwards, and the point where we're more connected to God afterwards, because that's ultimately what he wants to do in our lives. He doesn't want us to be held down by sin, by addiction, by struggles. He wants us to be free people. Like, he wants his people to be free. In Proverbs 4 verse 23 it says, above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. We need to guard our hearts, we need to protect our hearts, and in order to protect our hearts we need to do that deep digging, that heart work. It's gonna be painful, but it's gonna be so worth it. So this month I encourage you guys to do the heart work, and if anybody wants help with that or wants more guidance on that, feel free to contact me. Like, I'm no expert, but I've gone through that experience of God identifying something and then me having to do the work to know what God is exactly telling me. And it is a process. Like, there's things that I began dealing with years ago that I still haven't kind of walked out of, but it's a journey, it's a process, and it's a journey that is made easy, and more, not easy, but it's made more bearable with God. Like, he wants to deliver you from those things. So I encourage you guys this month to do the heart work, to spend that time with God, examining your heart, examining what's in there, and what maybe things that are going on that you had no idea were going on. So yeah, guys, I hope that you feel like you can do that. There's nothing that's too big or too hard for God to deal with. So yeah, stay tuned for the next video. Yeah, and yeah, I just hope that you're encouraged by that, and I'll see you guys in the next one.